Hello, this tutorial is going to run through chapter 11 of The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, and this chapter is titled The Fury. And essentially this chapter goes through that evening where Bruno's father is asked to become the commandant of Auschwitz by Hitler when he comes over to dinner for the evening. And of course there are some little telling moments throughout this chapter that hint at the conflict that follows in terms of the relationship between Bruno's father and his mother and Bruno and his father. So there are some little bits that we need to look out for as we go through. Of course, the father comes home. The chapter opens with the father being very excited about this announcement and looking forward to being able to host the Fury when he comes to dinner. And of course this is going to cause a bit of chaos in the household. The mother's initial reaction is that, you know, the house will need to be cleaned and there's this huge list of things that needs to get done, whereas the father is obviously just more excited about the potential news that comes with this visit. And of course Bruno, as he has throughout the entire text so far, has mispronounced it and calling him the Fury rather than the Führer. And even though the father tries to correct him, he says, "You're pronouncing it wrong," said father, pronouncing it correctly for him. You'll notice that we don't have the correct pronunciation listed here. We still just have Bruno's version of the words, and he's unable to get it right, and his father gives up. You know, he says here, "Oh, never mind." And of course Bruno's no idea who this character is, asking, well, who the hell is he anyway? So he's certainly not very socially aware, or even, I suppose, politically aware, more to the point, about the significance of this particular person. And Gretel's really simple response here, which captures it nicely. And it sort of, I suppose, mimics almost how we would feel in that same situation, saying, "He runs the country, idiot." And then of course she gets into trouble. She gets reprimanded for calling her brother an idiot. And then in the next section here, the mother asks if he'll be coming alone, and the father presumes that he'll be bringing her with him, which is of course a reference to Hitler's longtime partner, Eva Braun, to whom he was only married for about 40 hours before they suicided together in Berlin. So we've got references there that obviously show that it's not such a positive thing. Now, Eva Braun, the relationship between her and Hitler was actually hidden from the German public pretty much until after they had suicide, until they died. So these people, this family, Bruno's family, obviously has a bit of insider information into the life and times, the inner workings of Hitler. And that's because Bruno's father is very close to Hitler in terms of his ranking. Alright, as the chapter continues, an hour before the Fury was to arrive, Gretel and Bruno are brought downstairs and taken into father's office, which is obviously something that doesn't happen very often to them. And the father decides to put down some ground rules. And he says here, "Number 1, said father, when the Fury arrives, you will stand in the hall quietly and prepare to greet him. You do not speak until he speaks to you, and then you reply in a clear tone, enunciating each word precisely. Is that understood?" And then Bruno mumbles a response saying, "Yes, father." So his father's clearly worried about how his children are going to make him look in front of Hitler, in front of the Führer. And of course we know that throughout the entire text so far, Bruno has not been able to pronounce the Führer's name correctly anyhow. Okay, so he's going to struggle in this area regardless, poor Bruno. And then of course Gretel shows off by correctly pronouncing and very clearly voicing her response, which was to say, "Yes, of course, father." And it's interesting that during this discussion, the father says to them, "The last thing we need is for either of you to start behaving like children." which is ironic because they are children. They can't behave like anything other than children. What he's asking them is to actually be mature beyond their years, just so that the father can look good in front of his peers. So, an awkward situation, a difficult situation for both Bruno and for Gretel to a certain extent. And then, of course, the arrival. It comes on faster than we probably expect, and they arrive outside, and Bruno's description of them is always quite telling. And he makes this observation. The Fury was far shorter than father, and not, Bruno supposed, quite as strong. He had dark hair, which was cut quite short, and a tiny moustache, so tiny in fact that Bruno wondered why he bothered with it at all, or whether he had simply forgotten a piece when he was shaving. The woman standing beside him, however, was quite the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. She had blonde hair and very red lips, and while the Fury spoke to Mother, she turned and looked at Bruno and smiled, making him go red with embarrassment. So it's interesting that Bruno, just from this superficial engagement here, has judged Hitler as being sort of this unworthy character and this untrustworthy character rather, while Ava Braun he quite admires. He finds her quite beautiful to the point where he is embarrassed or blushing at her presence. And of course they get introduced, and Gretel and Bruno say a couple of things, and it's clear from this interaction that Ava is far more interested in the children than Hitler is. He's not there for them. And of course the conversation continues as Hitler enters the dining room. And Bruno notices the interaction and how differently that whole household is behaving because of the Führer's presence. And he notes here, the Fury, who was the rudest guest Bruno had ever witnessed, turned round and walked directly into the dining room and promptly sat at the head of the table, in Father's seat. Without another word, a little flustered Mother and Father followed him inside, and Mother gave instruction to Lars that he could start heating up the soup. So we can see clearly we've got the power imbalance that's going on here, and Hitler has just basically taken control of the room. And had Bruno understood the significance of this man, he would not have thought that to be such a rude thing. He would have actually been more respectful in the way he'd sort of responded to this situation. And it's interesting that Ava sticks around and has a chat to the children in spite of being called away by Hitler. So she's again a powerful woman is represented in this text. She doesn't seem too flustered. She doesn't seem to be threatened or to fear what it is, to fear Hitler and the things that he's asking her to do. And of course, the children are very soon sent to their rooms, and they can't go off and do anything that they would like to do. And the party continues downstairs. So there's not a great deal else that happens in there, except of course when we get towards the ending here. So if we check out this last bit here, we get these fragments of sentence starters, and this is probably a really good place to look at some of the conflict that occurs in here. And we could hear just little snippets of things of what they're saying, as if only a few of the words are carrying up the stairs where Bruno can actually hear them. And things like to leave Berlin and for such a place, or no choice, at least not if we want to continue. And, the mother also pleads, expect them to grow up in a place like that. It's clearly there is two sides to this. There's conflict, it's very clear, and it's captured well in this section of the text with the use of the ellipsis. We're only getting small fragments of information, but of course they're the pertinent parts, okay? They're the most significant things. And you'll notice that it ends with a very patriarchal, controlling, masculine figure here, where it says, and that's an end to the matter. I don't want to hear another word on the subject. So in spite of there being differences of opinion, there is no sense of compromise. The father has made the ruling and they all must follow. And that's probably why in some of the chapters we've seen so far, the mother deals, I suppose, almost peacefully, without sort of voicing her opinions, directly. She sort of follows the rule of her husband as she is expected to do.